Okay, members, it's time for questions to the Minister for Communities, and I call Daniel McCrossan to ask the first question. Can we have Mr. McCrossan on screen, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Question 1, please.
Thank you, and with your permission, I intend to answer questions 1 and 7 together. The rising cost of living and soaring increases in energy bills continues to have a major impact on people who are finding it harder to cope. Many are struggling to afford essentials such as heating their homes and paying their electricity. I announced on the 13th of January that I secured the support from the Executive for a £55 million energy payment support scheme to provide financial support to around 280,000 individuals across a range of benefits. The agreed scheme is targeted at individuals on low incomes who are in receipt of means-tested benefits administered by my department, and will provide a one-off direct payment of £200 to help with their energy costs. Despite only securing approval for this scheme on the 13th of January, I am acutely aware that energy prices are continuing to rise and household budgets are being squeezed. Therefore, I asked for payments to be made as quickly as possible. As I announced in the Assembly on the 1st of March, the payment date has been brought forward as much as possible, with payments reaching people's bank accounts from the 10th of March, which is this Thursday.
Supplementary, Daniel McCrossan.
I thank the Minister for answering the question. Minister, you'll be aware that a lot of people, many families, are struggling at this time with the rising cost of living and the increased cost of energy. It's having a very sore impact on working families in particular, people who are living week to week or day to day in some instances. Has the Minister considered extending this to all families? Because absolutely every working family now has also been impacted as a result of the cost of energy, and I'm worried that is tipping them towards the cliff edge. So, Minister, will you extend this to all families?
Well, I've continued to look to do all that I can to support families at this time. That's why, on top of this payment, I also invested an additional £2 million for the Bryson scheme, which would allow those families that weren't on means-tested benefits that avail of the £200 payments could still go if they were facing crisis in terms of their fuel and energy costs. Members will know that this scheme needed approval via the Executive. It also needed the sign-off from the First Ministers in terms of being paid under the Emergency Financial Assistance Act. So I'm trying to explore options to see if we were looking to make additional payments. Firstly, if I could secure the finances to do that, because obviously this scheme is £55 million. I don't have that sitting within my department, so we have to see if there's ways that we can draw down that additional money. But also, because we don't have a functioning Executive, I need to try and find another way then of getting this signed off and for money to be released under that Emergency Financial Assistance Act, because how the legislation is written at the moment is it needs the signature from Executive Office Ministers.
I call Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like thousands of families who will benefit from this much-needed assistance, I very much welcome the fact that the Energy Support Scheme payments are now set to begin this Thursday. And whilst this is already a huge scheme, can the Minister confirm she sought to broaden it even further to include those on working tax credits, but that the British Treasury refused to cooperate on this?
Yeah, when I was crafting the scheme, going back a number of months ago before I put proposals to the Executive, obviously I can make payments for those that are in receipt of benefits because we have their payment details, and therefore it's working with the Department of Work and Pensions with their computer systems. I made an approach in terms of HMRC around payments to those in receipt of tax credits, because I recognise that those families who are working and on low incomes are acutely impacted by the rising cost of living and the fuel crisis. Unfortunately, they were saying that there's no legal fix in order to do that, because they would need primary legislation to change their data sharing procedures, and that there wouldn't be time within this mandate and when the money had to be spent in order to do that. That said, I know around 45% of those who are on means-tested benefits are also in receipt of tax credits, and likely those who are in receipt of disability benefits, around 48% of those will also receive these payments because they qualify for one of the means-tested benefits.
Call Andrew Muir.
And I thank the Minister for her responses thus far. I think it's important to welcome this scheme, but also highlight the issues in terms of those who are excluded because of the lack of cooperation from HMRC. Can I ask the Minister what more she's doing to promote energy efficiency within people's homes and provide grant support for that, because it's a key action we need to be taken to support people in the cost of living crisis?
Yeah, well, it is unfortunate. We have continued to raise it with Treasury. I know the Finance Minister also and indeed has raised a number of other issues around VAT, around the windfall tax, and also that the British Government shouldn't be going ahead with their planned increase to taxes that are due to come into effect in April. So I know that there's been requests to that effect as well. I think in terms of, but they're saying that legislatively it needs primary legislation in terms of working tax credits. We asked them to share even the payment details that we could then make the payments, and they were saying that they weren't allowed, that would also need primary legislation as well. I think in terms of energy efficiency, I mean, we just had the further consideration stage of the private rented sector. That will start to bring forward greater protections for those within the private rented sector in terms of the conditions and the energy efficiency standards within their homes. We also run a number of schemes around fuel support and insulation as well. And only recently I announced an increased investment of over 15 million that I've secured for the Housing Executive in terms of tower block investment that needed, but also further insulation programmes for Housing Executive properties.
I call Mr. George Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 2.
Thank you. And just with your permission, I'm going to answer questions 2, 4 and 8 that all relate. I've undertaken a number of actions to progress this programme in the absence of a functioning executive. I've met with representatives from both the Irish Football Association and the NI Football League to reaffirm my commitment to this programme and to provide clarity on the work undertaken to progress the programme. I have followed this in writing to all member clubs of NIFL along with Derry City, and I intend to meet again with the IFA and NIFL in the coming weeks. I issued a letter to the Finance Minister to seek assistance from his department in addressing the cost increases that inflation has brought to the programme and how to secure additional budget required to cover these costs. I've also written twice to executive colleagues. The initial correspondence was to highlight the progress to date, including the detail of my request for assistance made to the Department of Finance, and to seek colleagues' support for my efforts to advance this important flagship programme. In my follow-up letter, I clarified that I would be grateful for colleagues' views and willingness to help in progress of the programme in the absence of an executive, and I can confirm that I have received some responses. Indeed, the Finance Minister wrote in terms of my letter around additional financial assistance that he would be keen to work with me in terms of looking at those uncontrollable increases around construction costs, for example. And I've got some support from some ministers around progressing the programme and to do all that we can to get around the impediment of no executive. I still await the response of a few other ministers to my letters. I've consistently stated that the programme will benefit the entire football family, including clubs. The need for the spread of investment and accessibility to improve facilities across the region has also been a common theme throughout the review exercise. And in addition to supporting increased participation in developing more sustainable and inclusive family-orientated facilities, the programme will provide an opportunity to contribute to the delivery of wider executive priorities, including social, economic and cultural needs with respective communities. And I would reiterate my commitment to investigating all options available to progress this important programme within this mandate.
Okay, and I call George Robinson, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree that if her party and other parties in this Assembly would join with the DUP to oppose the protocol, this money could be distributed to all those clubs tomorrow morning, such as Coleraine and Limavady United, who need this money urgently to improve their grounds?
If we had a functioning executive, I could bring a formal paper to them in terms of the financing and also moving ahead to the next phase. I don't know, quite frankly, what the protocol has to do with the Subregional Stadia programme, but I'll just leave it there.
I call Steve Egan.
Thank the Minister for her remarks, our answers so far. Minister, in your response just earlier now, you referred to the fact that you have asked all ministers to respond whether you're going to be able to release this funding. Can you tell us which ministers haven't?
Probably better tell you which ministers have, if that's okay. So I have the Minister of Finance, Justice, Education and Infrastructure have responded.
I call Pam Cameron.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for her answers so far. And I'm thinking in particular in relation to Ballyclare Comrades in my own constituency who have their own exciting redevelopment plans which would greatly benefit the club and the town. Can the Minister give an assurance that there will be no more delays in delivering this long-awaited programme, and if she could also explain what steps has been taken to progress the funding since assurance were given to clubs in February that this remained a flagship executive project?
Well, just to be clear, this is still a flagship executive project that was committed to under New Decade, New Approach, and there is a commitment for me to deliver it as quickly as possible. I communicated with colleagues around the executive table in terms of some of the concerns around progressing because of the need of executive approval. I'm obviously exploring to see what we can do to ensure that we can progress this Stadia development within this mandate, notwithstanding some of the impediments that are there, namely no functioning executive. So I await the response from those ministers that haven't responded yet, and I'm still looking at all legal routes to ensure that we can progress this. In the meantime, I'm continuing to meet, as I say, with the IFA and NIFL. We had a good level of engagement in terms of getting clubs ready in order to look at the needs of their club and also their capital Stadia needs, and I'll be meeting with them in the coming weeks again to progress that work.
Call Aisling Riley.
Minister, would you agree that the Subregional Stadia programme, similar to the much-needed investment in the likes of the health service, was effectively abandoned when the DUP walked out of the executive to put their own electoral interests above their constituents and the wider society?
No functioning executive obviously provides big challenges in terms of budgets and in terms of sign-off and approval around a lot of these programmes and spends as well, and we've seen that from other ministers also. I'm continuing to do all that I can to ensure that we can progress this vital programme along with all other programmes within my department that do need that executive approval, and I'll continue to work with the IFA and NIFL to ensure that we can do that, because this will have a real tangible benefit for clubs out on the ground, making sure that it has that spread across the north as well, and for those who need it. And my commitment is to do all that I can in this mandate to ensure that we can get this moving forward.
I'll just McNulty.
Thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Minister, soccer clubs are infuriated by delays in receiving payment for the sub-regional programme. Can you clarify, will they receive payment in this mandate? And can you also confirm whether you will be releasing legal advice received by your department relating to the sub-regional programme, Stadia programme?
Well, clubs aren't in a position just to receive this payment right away, so that's not where we are in the programme. Where we are is in terms of identifying what the need is, the type of capital expenditure that is going to be needed, and then to look at how clubs then can meet that with the budget that we've got. There's additional work that's being done, and that's why I wrote to the Finance Minister, because of the time scale when this programme was first agreed, and because of the increase in capital costs that we're seeing right across the board, hospitals, house and other projects that have been impacted. So we need to work all of that out to make sure that we can cover those controllable costs. The Finance Minister has responded in saying that he's willing to do all that he can, working with myself and other ministers to make sure that we can progress this. As I've said, I've obviously communicated to ministers around the executive table to work with me to overcome any impediment of no functioning executive, and I'm going to continue to engage them in the next couple of weeks.
Chris Little.
overdue release of the sub-regional stadia funding is really limiting the extremely positive impact clubs are having in our community, like Glentoran in my own constituency of East Belfast. Can I ask the Minister to repeat the Executive Ministers from which she has received a response in support of the fund, and whether she will be progressing on the terms of the working group recommendations?
Yes, well, the working group continues to meet, and my staff team within the department that's working on the sub-regional stadia continue to meet with them as well. As I said, I have met with the IFM, with NIFL, in terms of progressing that work as quickly as we can, identifying what the club needs are and overcoming the issues that I said around inflation and cost rises for materials. I can confirm that responses to my 2 letters that I issued in recent weeks have been received from the Ministers of Finance, Justice, Education and Infrastructure.
Call Jim Allister.
Absolutely clear. Is the Minister saying that, contrary to what you initially told this House, that this funding couldn't be released without executive approval, that it now could be released on the foot of a positive response from other ministers? And if so, has she got the money that would be necessary?
Well, firstly, the money has been secured. It's a commitment on behalf of the Executive, and I've been clear in stating that the money is secured for both sub-regional and the regional stadia programme in terms of Casement Park as well. We still have an impediment in terms of no functioning executive, but what I have communicated to Executive Ministers is my intent to try and progress this programme where I can, in the absence of no functioning executive, and asking those ministers to work with me. But we still need to work through those legal impediments that may arise as a result of no functioning executive. But I'm continuing to engage proactively with them, also with the Sporting Code themselves, the IFA and NIFL, to ensure that clubs are at a state of readiness, that when this programme opens, that they can apply seamlessly, and that process can be quickened up.
Moving on, I call Kelly Armstrong.
So on the 5th of May, the Jobs and Benefits Offices reopened. Sorry, the 5th of May last year. The Jobs and Benefits Offices reopened for people on a one-in, one-out appointment basis. This was extended to multiple appointments in the autumn of last year. Face-to-face services continue to be prioritised for vulnerable groupings, young people aged 18 to 24, and those not engaging using the telephone or digital channels, and those needing to verify their identity or to make a new claim. Concern about the COVID Omicron variant has meant that plans for wider resumption of services, including the opening of digital zones and offering a drop-in service, have temporarily been put on hold. My department, in conjunction with other civil service departments, are currently considering the COVID-19 measures in place throughout its workplaces in line with the Public Health Agency's advice. While face-to-face services continue to be constrained by measures such as social distancing, Jobs and Benefit Offices are using other service delivery channels such as video, telephone and digital to ensure people requiring assistance are supported in getting that.
Supplementary, Kelly Armstrong.
I thank the Minister for her response in this matter. Minister, you announced on, I think it was the 24th of February, about the labour market partnerships that are coming in from the councils. Could you confirm how those councils' new labour market partnerships will work with our Jobs and Benefits Offices?
Well, the labour market partnerships are a new approach in terms of working through the 11 local councils, so rather than just having regional-wide programmes, that they are tailored to meet the needs of each of those council areas. I was obviously out on a visit recently to ABC Council, where they are the first to go through this programme and to put their proposals forward. They will meet on a regular basis as part of a regional group that will tie in all of these local labour market partnerships directly with the department. They will have ongoing engagement and liaison with the department, not just Jobs and Benefits, but right across the scope of the department as well. And up until now, there's been really good work. For example, in ABC Council, where there was an identified shortage of HGV drivers in terms of obviously Brexit and other issues as well. They were able to run a programme to start to recruit people and to really fill a gap in that council area. So that's one example. We're obviously working with the remaining councils and getting their action plans in place, their prioritisations in place, and that's really about bringing the private, public and community and voluntary sectors together to respond to the needs of individuals who are looking work or to progress, and also the needs of employers in terms of where employment opportunities will be over the coming years. So it's an exciting programme, and we look forward to seeing the rollout and the impact that it's going to have at a local level.
Gemma Dolan.
Concordia, and I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Following on from your last response, Minister, can you give an additional update on the measures you're taking to help create employment opportunities?
Yes, well, as we said, we're rolling out these new labour market partnership approaches, and that's really where they will operate in each of the council areas. The councils will come together through these partnerships, working with the private sector, the community and voluntary sectors as well, to develop action plans to meet the employment needs of their local borough and the economic needs as well. As I've said, there's been some really good programmes that have been beginning to run within the Armagh, Burnbridge and Craigavon area that I went to, and of course other councils are coming forward with their proposed action plans, which we will look to implement as soon as possible. We obviously continue to look at other employment programmes, and even through the Advisor Discretion Fund, where I have supported upfront childcare costs, we are now seeing more and more families availing of that opportunity to allow them to access into employment. And recently I've launched a £10 million skills and employment fund targeted at the creative industries, the culture, arts and heritage sectors, and also the community and voluntary sector, which will see upfront employment opportunities for the next 3 years for people from those sectors. And indeed, applications have been going really well, with organisations out in the community applying to create hundreds of posts.
Mark Durgan.
I thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Firstly, could I place on record our gratitude for those hard-working staff in our Jobs and Benefits Office. It's a stressful job at the best of times, but I think it's fair to say the past couple of years has been unprecedented, not just in terms of demand, but in terms of the desperation of people and the situations that they've found themselves in and need help out of. Minister, just for clarity, I was wondering if you could outline to the House what support is provided by Jobs and Benefits Offices to benefit claimants, such as those in receipt of UC, who aren't computer literate, to ensure that they are not disadvantaged by its online system.
Yeah, well, there's practical hands-on support with work coaches that will work directly with individuals to go through all of the needs in terms of firstly processing or maintaining their benefit claim that they may be on, also helping with interview skills, with writing applications. There was obviously the Job Start programme as well, where we give practical 25 hours per week experience for young people up to the age of 25 in terms of testing out employment sectors that they would be interested in working in. We also offer through the Advisor Discretion Fund, as I said, upfront childcare costs. We can also cover other costs in terms of clothing, for example, that may be available for those that want to go to interview. And at the minute, we're looking to continue to expand on the Advisor Discretion Fund, for example, to look at the whole issue of digital connectivity and trying to look at ways that we can support those who are unemployed or looking for work at the moment with digital inclusion. So I'm hopeful to make an announcement on those issues and those enhancements in due course.
I call Rosemary Barton.
Question 5, Minister.
Thank you. All executive departments provide funding to charities to help deliver our programme for government outcomes, and we will continue to do so in the absence of our First Ministers. As the strategic lead with the executive for these sectors, I made nearly £90 million available of COVID executive COVID support and recovery funding available in 2021-22 financial year to charities, social enterprises and the wider voluntary and community sectors, including culture, languages, arts, heritage and sports organisations. This funding prevented the potential closure of local charities as a result of the pandemic, supporting their vital work at a time when it was needed most. I've made a £1.5 million of funding available to existing European Social Fund projects, which are continuing into 2022-23. This will help provide some certainty and securing these vital organisations. I also made a £43 million fund of executive COVID recovery funding available in this financial year. £23 million was to help organisations to manage their financial positions where they had COVID-related deficits, and up to £20 million will be used to support salary costs for new entrants through the COVID Employment and Skills Initiative. This will help organisations attract and, importantly, retain staff within those critical sectors. And I'm currently considering the independent review of charity regulation in the North to ensure that our system of regulation is appropriate and proportionate and provides public confidence. And indeed, the most recent Charities Bill 2022 is awaiting royal assent, having passed its final stage in the Assembly. This will restore the regulatory framework following the McBride judgment, thereby providing certainty for over 6,500 charities.
Supplementary, Rosemary Barton.
Thank you, Minister, for that very comprehensive answer. Minister, many charities provide an essential service, particularly in rural areas. And have you had any conversations with the DAERA Minister, perhaps to support these charities and work through them? These rural areas, phone calls in the morning and things like that.
No, I think there's been good collaboration with DAERA and indeed the Department of Infrastructure in terms of looking at the needs of rural communities, and we came up with a bespoke COVID recovery revitalisation programme that was targeted at those rural communities as well. And obviously we continue to engage with those departments in terms of the work that we would be doing within the Department for Communities. As I said, there's been a range of financial supports that have gone out to charities across the board in terms of assisting them throughout the COVID pandemic, particularly where there's been a loss of income or where the closure and really the stopping of their fundraising activities has really stunted their ability to deliver much needed services. And as you say, our charities have been excellent throughout the COVID pandemic in responding to people. In the Warm Well Connected programme that we did run within the department, those charities really stood up to the plate and working with us to meet the needs of rural residents as well, looking at the issue of isolation, of connectivity, and also around particularly mental health and well-being. So the financial assistance was critical to them in making sure that they remained open, firstly, but also that they could move to new modes of interaction, for example, going online, trying to do door-to-door services as well. And I know even our libraries, for example, extended those services throughout the COVID pandemic. And of course, looking at legislative protection. So I'll continue to work with DAERA and indeed with DFI as well around rural infrastructure to look at what we can do to further support them. And I think the collaborative approach where we brought monies together from the three departments was a good approach, and that's something that I have written to them to see how we can develop that further and to keep that approach going.
Minister, for answers so far. Minister, could you provide an update on the uptake of the COVID-19 Charities Fund, which was set up to help protect that sector during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, as I say, there has been funding that has went out in terms of the COVID pandemic. As I say, over £130 million of additional support, and indeed over 9,000 awards have been made to individuals and organisations to mitigate against the worst financial impacts of the pandemic as well. We did a lot of work then to support charity organisations themselves to make sure that we could stabilise them, to make sure that through the loss of income that they would normally fundraise for, they could still deliver the services and keep their doors open. That fund, the first fund, had been going well, and indeed the second fund that we had opened recently has also been drawn down well from many charity organisations across the board. We continue to work with the charity sector as well, as I said, around recent legislation that we passed around regulation on the back of the McBride judgment back in 2019, and of course the independent review of charity regulation and support going forward. There was a good extensive engagement with the independent panel that was set up, who had a good engagement with those charities, looking at their needs going forward. So I'm hopeful within the next mandate, on the basis of that review, that we can bring forward more robust legislation that further protects and enhances the work of this sector.
Members, that ends the period for listed questions, and now I move on to 15 minutes of topical questions, and I call Robin Newton.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Minister, can I ask you, what is the average waiting time for a face-to-face appeal for those who may be waiting for DLA, PIP, ESA appeals to happen?
I don't have. I know I gave this answer last month, so I did in terms of the average waiting time where we have. So I don't have the exact figure, so I can communicate that to you directly. But obviously there has been a backlog because of the pandemic as well, which exacerbated things, and we have been moving at pace to try and resume and to deal with that backlog in terms of hearings. We're also moving to other modes of contact as well, where we are doing interviews through digital form, either over the telephone for those who choose it, and also using other methods of digital technology as well. And we know that for many that this is their preferred use, but obviously there are still those who want the face-to-face contact. So we're trying to get, in working with Public Health Agency and with other civil service departments, trying to work at pace to fully resume face-to-face listings, and also to deal with the backlog that have been impacted through the pandemic as well. But the specific waiting time, I'll communicate that directly after this with you.
Supplementary, Robin Newton.
Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. I recently did an appeal for a constituent who had been waiting over 3 years. I have a number of other constituents who are not technology savvy, unable to get a face-to-face appeal, particularly those who are suffering from mental health issues or where a priority within their illness is mental health. Minister, could you just specifically what action you will take to ensure that the waiting time is reduced and that 3 years is something in the past?
Well, we are working at pace to try and address the backlog in appeals hearings. As I had raised at a previous question time, we're working with the appeals service to see what we can do. The main issue, particularly around appeals, is the availability of medical evidence, and indeed new medical evidence that is coming forward, and we're trying to work with the appeals service to try and front load as much of that as we can. As I said, I agree that there are still a good section of the population here that want a face-to-face hearing an interview, that they don't like to choose the method of doing it over the phone, albeit we have enhanced that service for those who do. So we're continuing to work with Appeal Service to deal with the backlog. It is a priority for the department to deal with that, and that's something that we're looking to progress. In terms of appeals more longer, the function will transfer to DOJ, but obviously because of no functioning executive that had to cease. But I am assuming that that will pick up again after the election, and if an executive is up and running, that we will continue that transfer of those functions as well.
Given the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Ukraine as a result of the Russian invasion, can the Minister tell us what she can do to provide support for refugees fleeing from the war zone?
Yeah, well, obviously it's distressing images that we're all seeing on our TVs in terms of those who are fleeing their own homes because of violence that has been happening on their streets and within their communities as well. And obviously our thoughts are to all of those almost 2 million people who have now been forced to flee and become refugees as a result of what's happening within Ukraine at the minute. Obviously my department has a long-standing history of welcoming people from war-torn countries into our communities, and indeed the community here as a whole has been very open into welcoming refugee and asylum seekers, those who are fleeing, who through no choice of their own, they would remain in their own home, but through no choice because of conflict and violence have had to leave. And indeed we have ran the Syrian resettlement scheme in terms of addressing some of those issues. I know that there's obviously difficulties at the moment because we don't have a functioning executive where normally these issues would be highlighted around that table. However, despite that and the barriers that that may create, I have written to the head of the civil service to ensure that my department stands ready to look at a refugee scheme to make sure that we're up and running, to assist in any way that we can in terms of the humanitarian crisis that are faced by many Ukrainians. And again, I hope that we can roll out a similar scheme to what we have done with the Syrian refugees. So my department stands ready and able, if we can find a proactive way around no functioning executive of starting to receive Ukrainian refugees, then we're ready and waiting for that to happen.
Supplementary question.
Cuirla is buíochas leis an aire as Uachta Fragra. I thank the Minister for that answer. And given the difficulties that she has outlined, I welcome her commitment to provide concrete support for refugees. And would the Minister agree with me that addressing the needs of people seeking sanctuary from a war-torn country should be a priority for every party in this Assembly?
I think definitely, yes, this is a humanitarian crisis and we need to do all that we can to provide support and sanctuary, as I say, that we have previously done in other crises as well. I'm going to work to provide solutions, and that's where my focus is at the moment. That's why I've written to the head of the civil service that we can actually start to get the work done, even in the absence of a functioning executive due to a party walking away. The Ukrainian people should have not just our solidarity, but our proactive support in meeting them in their greatest time of need. And I'm ready, my department are ready to take on whatever role and function is needed to ensure the safe passage of refugees from the conflict that they have been impacted by.
Call Melissa McHugh.
Minister, can you detail for us how welfare mitigations will be reviewed going forward?
So just obviously we have been through the extending the existing mitigation schemes, and I'm glad that I got the Assembly's support in doing that. We also last week went through the final stage in terms of the bedroom tax mitigation as well, where we took out the end date. And again, that mitigation will continue to run, thus spinning the bedroom tax, which I think is a really progressive step that the Assembly has taken. To that effect as well, obviously under New Decade, New Approach, there was a commitment to review the existing welfare mitigations, and to that effect I have set up an independent advisory panel to carry out that review and to make recommendations on future mitigation packages. In particular, I asked the panel to consider a wide range of new mitigations, including looking at the two-child policy, financial support for people who are making a new claim to UC, and for carers as well. So Les Allenby, the former Chief Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission, is leading that review, and I am expecting the recommendations of that in the coming week or so.
Supplementary, Melissa McHugh.
Thanks very much, Minister, for your answer thus far. And I have to commend you as well too on the great work that you have already done there and addressing some of these issues, given the limited capacity that all ministers now face at the present time because of no executive. But, Minister, given the scale of the Tory welfare cuts and the cost of living increase that we are all experiencing now, is it likely that these top-up payments will be necessary in the near future and on a continuing basis? And as such, how are we ever to take responsibility for that unless we have that sort of authority in our own hands and are in a position to address these issues?
Yeah, well, the mitigations currently will continue to run, and thankfully the bedroom tax no longer has an end date in it, and that's good. I always seen that any review of mitigations was to look at additionality, so it wasn't about stopping one of the existing mitigations, because I think that would have a completely negative consequence in terms of addressing poverty and inequality. There are a number of areas that I've said that I've asked the current review panel to look at, such as the two-child policy, the weight in terms of universal credit. But again, that's in the context that this executive, or when the executive was functioning, we spend over £600 million mitigating the worst effects of Tory welfare changes. And indeed, we do need a serious conversation as to what more we need to do, because we know the levels of poverty that is out there. We know particularly those who are in work, the working poor as well, who are really struggling, not just with the current cost of living crisis, but where we're seeing a trajectory for those whose wages, really their income doesn't supplement their outgoings and the rising costs that are attributed. So we do need to look at this. Obviously, the emerging anti-poverty strategy will also dovetail and work in coordination with the review of welfare mitigations, as will the disability, the gender and the LGBTQI strategies as well. So they need to be given the utmost urgency and importance in a new executive going forward in terms of looking at that. And of course, I mean, I would agree with as much powers coming back to this Assembly, which is made up of local elected representatives, and to take that away from Westminster so that the people here can decide on their future. And in terms of all of the laws, I mean, it would make sense to look at the financial powers that we have, because at the moment, around the cost of living, the British Government need to stand up and to do a lot more in meeting the needs of people on the ground.
Can I ask the Minister, has she had any conversation with housing associations regarding a rent freeze, similar to that which she has ordered in the house for housing sector properties?
Yes, well, I called or made the decision on the rent freeze in response to the cost of living crisis that residents are facing. I made a similar move throughout the COVID pandemic because people are making those stark choices in terms of their outgoings, and the cost of living crisis is really beginning to hit. I have called on housing associations that they should follow suit. Obviously, they're autonomous bodies. I don't have direct control in terms of their rent, but I have asked that they follow suit with my direction and call for a freeze this year because of the crisis that people are dealing with in the here and now.
Supplementary, Tagla Magalier.
I thank the Minister for her response and welcome her call. Indeed, her decision around rent freezes has been welcomed by thousands of families facing the spiralling cost of living. Indeed, whilst many of the causes of this are beyond the control of the Assembly, in most cases due to Tory austerity and Brexit, the Minister agrees it's important that ministers must do whatever they can to help ease the burden on hard-pressed households.
I think definitely, yes, we need to look at what we can do in order to ease the burden for people. We also need a bigger conversation in terms of the type of economy that we have, the level of wages, rights around collective bargaining, for example, in terms and conditions. I know there's obviously some private members' bills around enhancing those rights are going through the Assembly as well, and I welcome those. But we do need a critical conversation even around gender-proofing budgets that we have. And I'll give an example, a recent announcement that I made on improving the terms and conditions for those within the community and voluntary sector. They have seen the first pay increase in over a decade through the decision that I made. But when you look at the analysis of the figures, 84% of those who will now receive as a minimum the real living wage are people who are employed in the women's sector. And therefore there's a direct correlation in terms of terms and conditions of employment impacting on women, that impact on children, that has a direct impact on poverty. So we do need a difference in approach. I don't believe the current economic system globally is working to meet the needs of the majority of people. It's there to serve a small interest, because in all of these cost of living, somebody's making a profit. It's the large multinational companies that are making profits. Their profits have not been impacted, and it's instead the people out on the ground who are struggling every day, who are making up the cost and the difference. And therefore we do need a different conversation as to how we protect people, how we rebalance the economy into one that works for small businesses, but importantly for workers as well.
Members' time is up, and members, please take your ease before we move on to the next item on the order paper.